Hello imaginative people and welcome to Brainstorium. I'm Anna Tizard, award-winning dream punk and deeply weird fantasy author. And yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Consider me your inspiration mystic, here to take your imagination to a whole new world of story ideas using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. Today, episode 15, is a bumper show with lots to share about a new anthology I mentioned in the last show, Midwinter Magic Mayhem, edited by Frances Evelyn. It's a collection of winter-themed stories by several fantasy authors, including yours truly. The ebook will be available to subscribers of my private email list as a free gift, pre-publication, on the 8th of October, before it's released on sale on the 15th of October 2022. So make sure you head on down to annatizard.com before 8th of October to subscribe, and make sure you hit the confirm button. That will almost indefinitely land in your spam folder after you've started the process of subscribing. Now, for this show, I asked my co-authors to tell me two things. First, what inspired them to write their particular story for this anthology, and what generally inspires them, including any tips they might have for getting into the zone of inspiration. Lots to get through, and new rounds of Exquisite Corpse afterwards, of course. So let's begin. The Horsewoman by Anya Pavel is a fantasy based on historical events, including the Great Blizzard of 1888 on the east coast of the US, and also a long-burning fire in 1962. The character of the Horsewoman, who appears as a warning spirit in the story, is based on a mummy in real life known as the Siberian Ice Maiden, whose remains were discovered in 1993. Anya's story switches between different centuries, following generations of characters whose lives are linked not just through family history, but through a far-reaching ancestry. So when I asked Anya Pavel what inspired you to write this story for the anthology, she said, I'm an art historian. So the art of the Pazyryk Scythians, and yes, I had to look that up, how to pronounce that, has always fascinated me. Many of their mummies have beautiful tattoos that may have had spiritual significance. What if this magic could be passed down from generation to generation? That question spurred the story. I also make pazanki, the dyed eggs that are integral to the horsewoman, what she does in the story. These eggs are thought to have protective powers. I tapped into my ancestors' stories and added a hefty dose of magic. When I asked Anya what generally inspires you to write, she said, I'm inspired by strong female characters, myths from around the world, and magic. I also asked her, do ideas normally just arrive in your head, or do you go looking for writing prompts? And she said, ideas do pop into my head as flashes of emotion or a theme or for a novel. I usually listen to meditation music or take a walk to give the ideas more form. When I'm ready to record those thoughts, I grab some coffee and free write for an hour. Then I try to plot according to the Save the Cat plan. I work very well near the ocean and with calm music in the background. Well, I had to look up the Save the Cat plan because I'd never actually heard of it before. It looks to be a plotting system, and there's a very handy graph that comes up when you Google it to summarise the ups and downs of a plot line for a novel. So there's a handy tip. If you take nothing more from this podcast, look up Save the Cat plan. The next story I'm going to talk about is All That Remains by E.P. Stavs. This one starts off seeming like a traditional fantasy story set in medieval times, where a king's reward is promised to anyone who can kill the beast in the forest. However, the story moves on swiftly to the moment of the kill, and you realise there's going to be a lot more to this story than that. Two very different brothers, a betrayal, and the search for justice that goes beyond the land of the living. I asked EP Stabs what inspired you to write this story, and she said, I love Grimm's fairy tales. So doing a retelling of one of the more obscure stories was already on my bucket list. My storytelling style tends to be a quirky combination of cheeky and light stroke dark and dreadful, and Grimm's The Singing Bone was the perfect tale to blend both of those aspects together. I had an absolute blast writing it, and hopefully readers will enjoy it just as much. And for handy tips for getting into the zone of inspiration, EP said, something I've started doing lately to maximise my writing production while the girls are at school are writing sprints. I find fitting instrumental music for my headphones, set my timer for either 20 or 25 minutes, and I'm off. During that time, I just write, which means no stopping to Google names or look anything up. If I don't know what the word I need is, I use a placeholder such as word or name and just keep on writing. So far, it's been working really well, and I always make sure to celebrate each one with a dance break at the end. Brilliant! And interesting that a 20 to 25 minutes stint is what's working for EP Stabs, because that's something I very much advocate. Great stuff. The next story is Daisy by Ash Fitzsimmons. I love this one. It features a winged cat, and I want one. While settling into her new flat, the character Janie adopts a hungry, injured animal she discovers in her back garden, a cat with wings, whom she names Daisy. But Daisy isn't the only supernatural intrusion in her back garden. It all begins with a mysteriously broken bird feeder. When I asked Ash what inspired her to write this story, she said, last year I decided to buy a bird feeder for the back deck, which led to downloading the Merlin app and getting weird looks from my friends when I try to ID birds in public, but I digress. As my yard is fenced and was then treeless, the only visitors I had were the birds roosting on the neighbouring properties. Everything was going well, the birds liked the feed, and the little plastic feeder could withstand even the summer thunderstorms. Until one day when I came home and found it smashed open on the deck. This was odd, as the nail on which I'd hung it came out of the post at a steep angle. Even a strong gust wouldn't have lifted the feeder off and tossed it, and getting it open takes work. But I refilled it and hung it again and went about my life. A few days later, same thing. I've since bought a heavier feeder and found a different sort of hook, and it's remained untouched. I have to assume the culprit was a marauding squirrel, but what if it wasn't? Couple that with the neighbourhood cats I see wandering around when I take my morning walks, and Daisy was born. When I asked Ash, where do you get your ideas from general, she said, I tend to be a series writer. Once that initial idea appears, and quite often it seems to come of its own accord, I run with it and the story seems to build itself. So that sounds quite organic to me. The next story is Lilium's Lesson by Elizabeth Minosi. There's something really delicious about this one. A succubus, a female demon, is on the prowl. She reads thoughts, but at the same time, she feeds on that person's soul, just a little bit. They hardly notice, but gradually the victim becomes addicted to her. Lilium is on Earth and has been assigned a mentor who's trying to prevent her from causing chaos. But things don't really go to plan as she meets a handsome and slightly gullible man whose thoughts she likes to taste. When I asked Elizabeth what inspired her to write this story, she said, "I'd just finished writing the last novel in my series, and I really wanted to write out the backstory for my villain and do a villain origin story for Lilium. When I originally imagined the story, I hadn't thought much about the time of year that it took place. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense that these events would happen around the holiday season, because the first book in my series is set during the winter solstice, and the solstice is a time of power for the antagonists that Lilium is working with in that book." I was thinking it's a really good idea actually to write something that fits into an existing series so you can introduce readers into that world, brand new readers who never would have come across your series otherwise. A cunning idea. I asked Elizabeth what generally inspires you to write, and she said, "Knowing that I have all these stories I want to tell and they aren't going to write themselves, or knowing there's another project that I want to work on but I can't start it until I finish the one I'm currently working on." So a little bit of creative pressure there. Her two best tips for getting into the zone of writing are: 1. If you find that you want to write but you're struggling to get started, pick a scene that you can vividly imagine, set a timer for 15 minutes, open a document and start writing as much of that scene as you can before the timer goes off. Usually that's enough to break the ice for me, and once I get going, I don't really want to stop. If that doesn't work, tip number 2 is open a blank document and type, "What does my main character do next?" or any other question that has you stumped and feeling like you can't move forward. If you don't have a specific question, just type, "Why am I stuck?" and then keep typing in a stream of consciousness, answering your own question, asking more questions as they come up, and so on. Usually at some point I will get that aha moment where I figure out the piece that's missing and keeping me from making progress. Some great tips there. Similar to my 20-minute magic, again, of forcing yourself to write whatever you can within a specific time frame. It seems limitations really do help us get ourselves out of a rut. And typing questions to yourself, so you're having a conversation with yourself about the problems or the barriers that you've hit, that's a really good idea. Next up we have The Spirit of Christmas Going Forward by Frances Evelyn, who is the editor of the anthology. This story is also related to a wider series, though this time it's a work in progress. Frances is writing a cosy paranormal family saga called The Spirit of Agatha Drummond. In this story, we're introduced to the Manderson family, with twins Annie and Maria doing spiritualist readings in a slightly raucous Christmas party. When I asked Frances about her inspiration for the story, she said, "Out of curiosity, I went to a spiritualist meeting with a friend a few years ago. The mediums seemed genuine and caring, and the messages were comforting and helpful. Nothing remarkable happened, just some clunky cold reading, but people really did believe they'd heard from dead relatives. This raised a lot of questions for me, and that's usually where I start writing. Do mediums believe they're communicating with the dead? If not, what's in it for them? How come dead people never say anything mean? How would a skeptic respond to a genuine message?" I sat down to explore some of these ideas, and the twin sisters emerged. Maria, a medium like their mother, is great at reading people. Annie, a committed skeptic, works in HR but has no people skills. I love that. It's bad enough that they can't sell their mum's house until they find a sister they've never heard of. But then their dead father gets in touch and it's Annie he wants to talk to. That's such an intriguing idea. And this is a great introduction to the series, which is yet to come, by Frances Evelyn. So next up we have The Spirit of Winter by Joan Wendland. This one struck me as being really different. Jessica's car breaks down in the freezing snow in the middle of nowhere, and she has no bars on her phone. She falls asleep and finds herself in a pub surrounded by some very strange new companions intent on holding a winter cocktails competition. And she's wondering, is this real? What particularly struck me was how unusual it is to have so much of a sense of taste in a story. That made it thoroughly enjoyable. I don't often drink cocktails, but with this story describing all these different drinks, you don't need to. You get to imagine all these amazing flavours. It's a really unusual experience. So when I asked Joan what inspired her, she said, "I have an odd relationship with my brain where we sort of talk to each other internally. I promise this is a creative process rather than a mental illness. When I was given the direction to write a fantasy story set in and or about winter, my brain said, let's really capture the spirit of winter. Wouldn't it be cool if we incorporated the actual spirits of winter like Jack Frost and the Snow Maiden?" I replied. "Okay, I like that." And my brain said, "But what are they going to do?" And that, dear reader, is when I reminded my brain that spirits can also mean alcohol. When generally talking about getting into the zone of inspiration, she said, "Ideas tend to ambush me when my brain is inactive or on complete autopilot. Times I've been hit with inspiration include dreaming, long-distance driving, showering, in long boring meetings, etc. I can also be inspired by odd phrases such as bizarre song lyrics." Well, that's really interesting how ideas seem to crop up, sort of well up from the unconscious mind for Joan Wendland, and it almost seems as if she's sort of she's acknowledging that process and allowing for those things. So perhaps actually detaching herself from any sense of pressure to just let them arise from beneath the surface. Very interesting. The next story is Sins of the Fathers by T.M. Cole. Two boys are in a snowy forest with their father hunting. They come across some ancient ruins and end up camping there for the night. Their father falls into a catatonic state. There's this strange spiritual undertone to the story, and this struck me as the most mysterious tale in the book, in a way. There was such an atmosphere in it too, which reminded me of the silence of snow, how it cloaks everything and creates this special kind of quiet that is different to normal quietness. There's just something about snow. The story was really intriguing and one of my favourites. I asked T.M. Cole what inspired her to write her story, and she said, "I've had the general idea for Sins of the Father for some time, and given the wintry theme of Midwinter Magic Mayhem, it sounded like the perfect opportunity to use it. Beyond that, as a child, I loved exploring the woods outside my grandparents' house. In the winter, it would be so quiet and mysterious, and every once in a while I would stumble across old ruins of a chicken coop or farm equipment covered in snow and forgotten. That kind of imagery was a big inspiration for the story." When I asked her what generally inspires her to write, she said, "Anything and everything inspires me. It could be scenery, music, a life event, an interaction, or simply an interesting image or concept that pops into my head. Sometimes it helps me to map out ideas, but most often just walking or sitting and daydreaming invite new ideas to come." So that's a similar a similar system of just allowing stuff to come to you, being stirred up from the depths of your imagination. When I asked her about generally getting into the zone of inspiration, she said, "I can't recommend taking walks enough and letting your mind wander. For me, it's difficult to force myself to sit down and generate ideas. But if I'm allowed to just meander with my thoughts, I'm continually surprised what ideas come." Another way I get into the zone is by talking with others about my story ideas. More often than not, it will help me make a connection that I didn't see before, and the other person often has good input to get ideas flowing or help work out a problem I'm stuck with. Or help work out a problem I'm stuck on. Another story is A Noisy Sort of Whimper by Terry Kerr. This story has a kind of snarky style, very different, shot through with a black humour. It begins with a death, or so we believe. It's a strange kind of love story, but also a story about the end of the world and how the world might never end, and not in a good way. When I asked Terry what inspired this story, he was very candid. He said back in 2004 his mother died, and between that happening and her funeral, he dreamt he was in her house arguing with her as she sat on her sofa. "Mum," he kept saying, "you have to get out of here. You have to go. You're dead." To which she replied, "Well, if I'm dead, who are you talking to?" And that sat in his subconscious ever since. He said, "When Frances contacted me about the possibility of contributing to Midwinter Magic Mayhem, that idea finally found its place. Ideas are like that, I think. Good ones hang around, bad ones die quickly." I asked him what generally inspires him to write, and he said, "I don't know. I don't use prompts. I think the closest I can come to make sense of it is I want the voices in there to shut up. So if I write it down, they go away. And sometimes they do. There's a book, An Unquiet Past, which was inspired by my then beloved. We stayed in a 15th century cottage in the Cotswolds, and I said, just as I turned off the light, 'I wonder how many people have died in this room. Good night, love.' 2 years later, a book. That's about as close as I can get." What strikes me about Terry's thoughts in particular are that we often feel like ideas come from nowhere and they're out of our control. But when we take a moment to reflect, we can often work out or sort of work our way back to certain things that have happened to us which have fed into the ideas. And in this case, Terry was very clear on that. But what I'm picking up from the other authors is that it's kind of like a balance between ideas seeming to come from nowhere and perhaps treating them to some extent as if they should, and that's they need a kind of a space to come to you in their own sweet time. But at the same time, it is possible to locate the event or something that triggered the idea. It's the process by which they kind of build into something, into an actual story that is a bit of a mystery, but perhaps you become a bit of a shepherd of these ideas. I don't know if that's the best metaphor, but it does seem to be an interaction between the two things, the conscious and the unconscious. The journey of how these little sparks of ideas percolate in the background and then morph into fully fledged stories does seem to be a whole other process behind the scenes, a lot of which would appear to be work carried out by our unconscious minds until we find ourselves sitting at a desk trying to find and hone the story's final shape. And as for my experience of writing my winter-themed story, which is called Overcast, I think being given a specific theme to write about can be a double-edged sword. It is really hard, in my opinion anyway, to decide to be inspired by a particular theme at the outset. It really helps if you've already got an idea in the back of your mind, which you can then adapt and develop for that specific purpose. And I see I wasn't the only author that did this. However, at first, I did kind of back myself into a bit of a corner on this, because straight away I realised I also really wanted my story to be an Exquisite Corpse inspired one, because I'd never done that before for a book-length anthology. And so, in a way, I'd made it doubly difficult for myself in terms of inspiration, because not only was I trying to reach for a wintry idea, but I found myself hunting for a specific Exquisite Corpse which could fulfill that. Now, if you're a regular listener, you may be thinking, what the hell is she doing? Because this is kind of the opposite to what I would advocate on the show, and the opposite to what I would normally do. As I've just been saying, inspiration is like a subtle dance between pushing yourself to explore and come up with something versus letting go and allowing space for ideas to arise seemingly of their own accord. I usually let Exquisite Corpses speak for themselves and take me on a journey into my imagination. I wouldn't normally go hunting for a really specific idea among them, deliberately trying to find an Exquisite Corpse that would fit my purpose, in this case a winter story. Unsurprisingly, this didn't work for a while. I even asked my subscribers to send me some wintry themed words through the play page at anatizard.com, hoping that something would crop up in the Socks of Destiny and give me the perfect idea. Well, in my experience, ideas don't really work like that for me, but I guess I was experimentally setting aside what I know to try and see if it was in fact possible. Just this once, I just needed a winter story. In the end, I had to drop this silly pursuit, and instead I reached for a previous idea I'd sketched out some years ago and had never fully developed, and combined that with another Exquisite Corpse that on the surface of it had nothing to do with winter, but gave me a bit of a spark of an idea. So I put the two together to create something new and wintry. The previous idea that I'd sketched out was about a young woman living in the city who has to go and visit her grandmother in the country. In the family, it's generally believed that the grandmother is starting to get confused, may have the beginnings of dementia coming on, and might not be able to cope on her own in this little cottage in the middle of nowhere. But when the protagonist arrives, she begins to be drawn into her grandmother's world of fairies and realises it's all real. I hadn't got much further than that, and I just left a document sitting on my computer for years. The Exquisite Corpse that I wound into this initial idea was the long-tailed mystic learned the secrets of the overcast gargoyle. Thanks to M.L. White, Cliff Jones Jr., Tad Kelson and Marissa D for those words that made up this Exquisite Corpse, for submitting those words on my play page. Overcast was my way in to something weather related, and from that I could construe the basis for a magic related to the seasons. I thought about what the seasons might do if you could use their properties somehow, magically. For example, spring would be about things blossoming, autumn would be about the power of change, and winter would be about stillness and putting things on hold, freezing them in one way or another. I quickly realised the original grandmother character needed to be younger and more active, a witch, to introduce the protagonist, called Penny, to this other reality of magical seasons. So I changed Penny's grandmother to an aunt, living in a cottage in the countryside as before, but very much involved in her garden. The gargoyle from the Exquisite Corpse became part of a portal into the form of a water fountain that takes Penny into a magical winter version of her aunt's garden, where something in her mind, or should I say in her heart, has been put on freeze. The story actually begins on a hot summer's day to contrast the winter that seems to be inside Penny. She is a young director of a rock music magazine, very accomplished in her early years. When she interviews a very good-looking graphic designer for the magazine, she gets the shivers and her lips turn blue. Penny visits her estranged, witchy aunt for answers, and she finds them through a portal into a magical garden where it's always winter. Right, that's all you're getting for the ebook now. Just make sure you subscribe to my free newsletter at annatizard.com in time for the 8th of October 2022 to receive your free ebook. After that, from 15th of October, it will be on sale on Amazon. Now, before we move on to the game section of the show, I just wanted to mention there won't be a show, there won't be a Brainstorium in mid-October. It would have been the 16th of October because I'm taking a much needed break as I will need time to review and edit the short story entries for the Halloween show on the 30th of October. Very excited about doing that. So that will be the next Brainstorium show, 30th of October, Halloween stories. There's still time to send me something. Have a think. And get in touch if you have something to share. Details are in the show notes of the previous show, number 14, or you'll see them at annatizard.com on the Brainstorium page. Right, I think it is time for the Socks of Destiny. Now, just for those who are new to the game of Exquisite Corpse, each time you submit words to my play page at annatizard.com, you'll be asked for 2 describing words, 2 nouns, and 1 action part for the middle of the sentence. And there are examples on the page for each of those to help you try and work out what might work best. But otherwise, it's completely up to your imagination. And then they will be scrambled and put into the Socks of Destiny, which I'm about to dip into now. What weird word combinations will we have today? This is from someone who's called themselves Walk on Poo with an H on the end, okay? Smelly. Okay. We can work with smelly. And the noun for this is from Fraser Armitage, Weatherman. So we have a smelly weatherman. Right. What did he get up to? Let's see. This is from the Poet's Goblin on Twitter. 8. Right, so we have a smelly weatherman having his lunch. And what constitutes his lunch? This is from Mariah. Fluttering. Oh dear, sounds like his lunch isn't quite dead yet. Okay, final go. To complete this sentence, this is from Alessandro Bozzo, and it is alchemist. Okay, we've got our work cut out for us today. The smelly weatherman ate the fluttering alchemist. Let's see. Well, fluttering makes me think of a butterfly or moth, but that's still kind of gross as something to eat while it's still alive. But how can a moth or a butterfly be an alchemist? Oh, but there's a school of thought that about true alchemy, saying alchemy is about transformation of the self. It's not just about transforming metals or basic ores into gold, that is in fact a metaphor for a spiritual transformation, a purifying of the self through contemplation and deep spiritual realizations. And of course, butterflies and moths are transformatory creatures as they go through metamorphosis. So there's a parallel meaning here, a potential for a fluttering alchemist to mean something both physical and metaphysical. Is that too deep? Maybe it's too deep. Okay, I think I need some green tea now. Can be safely said. It is time for the brew. Give that a bit of a stir. Okay. Right, let's come back to the sentence. The smelly weatherman ate the fluttering alchemist. I have an image of something small and frantic in a cage. An alchemist, an old professor, or maybe a witch who's been performing experiments in their lab and they've accidentally turned themselves into a moth or a butterfly. Or maybe it's deliberate. It's a spell, a bit of medieval chemistry, whichever you prefer. It's gone wrong. Maybe it is deliberate and she wants to spy on a creature that hides in a cave, hoarding treasure or magic. It kind of feels like it should be a dragon. But I'm starting to stray away from this sentence, because how can a dragon be a smelly weatherman? Unless they're just a kind of a creature that's not human, that is actually pretending to be human. There's a lot of transformations going on here. So if we're going to say the fluttering alchemist is a witch who's turned herself deliberately or accidentally into a moth on the one hand, trying to sneak into a cave to spy on or steal from, a dragon who in turn has transformed himself into a smelly weatherman, or a weatherman, but as in a creature who can still sense the weather through his scales and is smelly, like maybe the smell is a kind of a leftover characteristic of his dragonhood. The one thing he can't hide about his dragonhood is the smell. Can make himself look like a human, but he's always going to smell like a dragon. So actually, I think we can safely say what I am gabbling my way towards is the idea of two beings who can transform themselves. One is a dragon who likes to pretend to be a human, and the other is a witch who, for whatever reason, has ended up becoming a moth or a butterfly, and sadly, on her way in to perhaps steal back the magic that's been taken from her, I don't know, or simply steal the treasure that this dragon's been hoarding secretly in his cave. She's been captured and gets eaten. It doesn't bode well for the witch. I don't know. This was a really tricky one. I think it's time to move swiftly on to the next sentence. Let's see. this is from Athena with a capital A at the end. Crazed. Can just mean sort of out of control. Let's get the noun for that. This is from me. Fronds. What? Oh wow, I have this image of under a pond. The fronds in the pond are crazed. Oh gosh. Right. Let's see what they get up to. This is from Paul Thomas. Had a dream about. Okay, so we have sentient fronds having dreams. Do fronds dream? Well, I think we're about to find out. This is from Andy Burrows. Sorted. Okay. It's an interesting use of an adjective. Something or someone who was sorted. Oh, that could mean put in order or something like that, couldn't it? This is from the Poet Goblin again. Old one. Oh, this is a weird one. So we have the crazed fronds had a dream about the sorted old one. God. It feels like almost religious or spiritual imagery here with the old one who is sorted, as in together, composed, knows who they are, knows what they want. And the fronds who are crazed, it's a storm and the rain is pummeling the surface of the water and those fronds are just waving about manically, but they dream. They dream of an old one, the great plant that grows in the very deeps. Or maybe a tree. A tree would be a sorted old one, surely in the, I was going to say in the eyes of a of pondweed, but pondweed does not have eyes. It has an inner eye with which it dreams of something else. Oh, this is so strange. It makes me think a bit about my second book, Eye for Immortality, where plant life has a kind of deep consciousness and connects all things, but I don't want to say too much because that's almost bordering on a spoiler territory if you haven't read it yet. But oh, this is so weird, and I'm not quite sure what else I could do with it, although I am intrigued that there is a similarity in tone to the previous one we've just had with an alchemist in it, and that felt kind of, is it spiritual, is it paranormal? Very interesting. Perhaps I'm building up to their Halloween show and I'm just kind of in the mood for this. But then it's all completely random what I pull out of the socks. So I think I'm just going to have to go for number 3 and hope that we have something that makes a little bit more sense here. See what we can do. Right, the first describing word is from me again. Most incredible. Okay, I don't remember writing that, but never mind. Noun would be from Mr. Joseph Clark, and this is squanto. Now I had to make a note of this, I had to look it up because I didn't know about this. So this is, a squanto is a member of a Native American tribe who helped the English colonists in Massachusetts by teaching them agricultural techniques and also being interpreters. So the most incredible squanto did what? This is from Twitter ID Yashal_Chisty. Made a castle out of the large mountain that hid. Wow, that is a long action. Let's see what we can make from that. It really depends who or what else is involved. Describing word is from Ian Nathaniel Cohen. Insidious. Okay. I'm starting to worry now about this this action. Made a castle out of. Oh my god. Right. Let's see. This is from Alessandro Bozzo. Tax collector. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let us collect ourselves. I'm just going to have another sip of green tea. It's all fine. Right. The most incredible Squanto made a castle out of the large mountain that hid the insidious tax collector. What? Oh my goodness. Okay, let's think about this. But I think we need to unpack. It's quite a complex action, as I said, because you've got someone who's made a castle out of the large mountain that hid an insidious tax collector. I love that, insidious tax collector. Yeah. So the point here is that they were hiding. A tax collector is hiding behind a large mountain, out of which the Squanto made a castle. Oh my goodness me. Oh, but I see it now. That's what's going on. The tax collector has been hiding behind a large mountain, and this magical person, clearly this Squanto has magic because they're able to make a castle out of a large mountain. This is how they find the tax collector. They transform the mountain into a castle so they can actually go in, open the door and pull him out. You can't hide behind a mountain. I will change the mountain into a castle. Seems like a lot of effort or a lot of magic to perform just to find this hiding tax collector. Wouldn't it just be simpler to walk around the mountain? I don't know. It depends. There's something about this magic which, while it transforms, it enables the Squanto to find the person or find something that would otherwise be hidden in that thing if it was just left in its original form. This is a really weird kind of magic. Is it a bit like, say, if I lost a pound coin down the side of the sofa, instead of pulling the sofa apart, you know, sticking my hand down the crevices, try and pull it out, try and find it, I decide to transform the sofa into a piggy bank, and that way I can find it. Or is it, I suppose, because this story involves people who make decisions rather than coins that just slip down the sofa. So the tax collector who's been stealing insidiously from this tribe is going to hide among the mountains and will just continue to run away whenever he hears anyone coming close, because the Squanto people are coming after him. But the chief Squanto knows that sooner or later this tax collector is going to get tired He's not used to this terrain. It's going to get dark and cold, and he'll be looking for shelter. And there's no real shelter here in the mountains, and there's snow coming. What will he do? Where will he go? Oh, but wait, here's a castle nestled between the mountains with lights flickering. There'll be somewhere warm to sleep. If, well, I guess the tax collector will have to at least pretend to be nice when he knocks on the door and beg them to let him in and perhaps give him some food. Well, hey, he's got a bit of cash in his pocket. Perhaps he could use that. But he doesn't realise that this is a trick performed by the Chief Squanto, who has trapped him by turning a mountain into a castle. Okay, and that's why this Exquisite Corpse says that the Squanto is most incredible. There you go. It kind of worked. Very weird though. Kind of wintry as well. Speaking of which, don't forget, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so at anatizar.com to get your free copy of Midwinter Magic and Mayhem, which will be available to subscribers for free on the 8th of October 2022. So get in there while it's still going to be available. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be a few weeks break now until the next show, which will be on the 30th of October, the Halloween show. And it's not too late to send me a short story based on an Exquisite Corpse on the show, 400 to 2,000 words. Listen to show number 14 or just check the show notes for that particular show. But you can, of course, write a short story based on any Exquisite Corpse that's come up on any of the shows, depending on what inspires you. Well, until next time, go forth and be inspired.